Some women don't chase, and yet they're never forgotten. There exists a particular kind of woman who moves through the world like water finding its own level, never forcing, never demanding, never breaking herself against the rocks of another's resistance. She doesn't text first when silence stretches between them. She doesn't explain herself when misunderstood. She doesn't fill the empty spaces that others leave behind with her own desperate energy. And this drives certain men absolutely wild. Not because she plays games, but because she has learned something most never will, that the feminine power to withdraw is far more potent than any power to pursue. Picture her, this woman who has touched the deepest parts of her own psychology. She has done what Carl Jung called shadow work, facing the parts of herself that once begged for validation, that once twisted herself into impossible shapes to earn love. She has met her own hunger for approval in the darkness and emerged with something far more valuable: self-knowledge. When she encounters a man who tries to control through withdrawal, through hot and cold behavior, through the subtle manipulation of attention and affection, something extraordinary happens. Where other women might panic, might chase, might lose themselves in the labyrinth of his mixed signals, she simply observes. She recognizes what Jung would call his projection, the way he unconsciously casts his own unresolved relationship with the feminine onto her. His mother's love that came with conditions, his fear of vulnerability dressed up as strength, his ego's desperate need to maintain dominance even as his soul yearns for genuine connection. But here is where the story becomes interesting, where the real psychology reveals itself. When she doesn't respond to his control tactics with the expected feminine chaos, when she doesn't become smaller to make him feel bigger, when she doesn't sacrifice her peace for his comfort, his unconscious mind begins to fracture. The very foundation of his relational strategy crumbles. You see, men who attempt to control through emotional withholding are operating from what attachment theory calls an avoidant pattern. They learned early that love is dangerous, that opening leads to wounding, that the safest position is always one step removed. So they create distance to feel safe, push away to avoid being left first. But when she doesn't chase across that distance, when she honors it as sacred space rather than abandonment, his psychology cannot compute this response. His anima, Jung's term for the unconscious feminine aspect within every man, begins to stir in ways he doesn't understand. The first crack in his armor appears when she responds to his silence with her own deeper silence. Not the silence of sulking or punishment, but the silence of a woman who has found something more interesting than his attention: her own completeness. This is not the behavior his unconscious expects. His ego anticipated the familiar dance, his withdrawal, her pursuit, his eventual return to a woman grateful for scraps of his affection. Instead, he finds himself thinking about her when he meant to forget her, wondering what she's doing when he planned not to care. The Stoic philosophers understood this principle, that true power lies not in forcing outcomes, but in mastering our responses to what we cannot control. She has become stoic in the deepest sense, not cold or unfeeling, but grounded in an unshakable sense of her own worth. Watch what happens next in this archetypal drama. As days pass without her reaching out, without her explaining herself, without her trying to fix what he broke, his behavior begins to shift. The very control he thought he wielded starts to slip through his fingers like water. He finds himself the one checking his phone, the one wondering if she's moved on, the one feeling that gnawing anxiety he once projected onto her. Jung called this enantiodromia, the tendency for things to turn into their opposite when taken to extremes. His attempt at emotional dominance transforms into emotional dependency, but she has learned to live with uncertainty as a friend rather than an enemy. Trauma psychology teaches us that healing comes not from controlling outcomes, but from building tolerance for the unknown. She has built this tolerance through inner work, through learning to self-soothe, through discovering that her worth was never dependent on his recognition of it. The second profound shift occurs when he realizes that his usual tactics, the breadcrumbs of attention, the hot and cold messages, the subtle implications that she should be grateful for any contact at all, fall flat against her newfound emotional sovereignty. She doesn't respond with joy to his casual text after weeks of silence. She doesn't rearrange her schedule when he suddenly wants to see her. She doesn't pretend that nothing happened when he reappears as if no time has passed at all. This isn't manipulation on her part. It's integration. She has integrated the lesson that consistency in others is a gift, not a given, and that her energy is too precious to waste on those who treat it carelessly. Her response, or lack thereof, forces him to confront something he's spent years avoiding: the reality that genuine connection requires genuine vulnerability, not the illusion of scarcity he's been creating. What's happening to her is what Jung called individuation, the psychological process of integrating conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche to form a whole authentic self. She is no longer split between what she truly feels and what she thinks will make others love her. This integration makes her magnetic in a way that has nothing to do with physical beauty or performance. She radiates the kind of self-possession that comes from having faced one's own darkness and chosen light anyway. She has learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between solitude and abandonment. When he finally reaches out, and he will because the unconscious cannot tolerate unfinished business, she meets him not from a place of neediness or resentment, but from a place of choice. She has reclaimed her power to choose, which was always hers but had been forgotten in the maze of his mixed signals. The third and most crucial moment arrives when she realizes that her peace matters more than his presence. This isn't about winning or losing, about punishing or rewarding. It's about something far more profound: the recognition that she was never the problem to be solved. His inconsistency, his need to control through withdrawal, his inability to offer genuine emotional availability, none of this was ever about her worthiness. It was about his own unhealed relationship with intimacy, his own fear of the feminine power he couldn't understand or control. But understanding this doesn't mean accepting it. Compassion for his wounds doesn't require sacrificing her own well-being on the altar of his healing. She can hold space for his humanity while protecting her own peace. This is the hidden feminine power that breaks his control, the power to love herself enough to walk away from what doesn't serve her, even when it comes wrapped in potential. And so she becomes the woman who doesn't chase, doesn't explain, doesn't shrink herself to fit into the small spaces others create for her. She has learned that true feminine power isn't about being chosen, it's about choosing. Not about being seen, but about seeing clearly. She understands now that the right love won't require her to abandon herself to receive it. That authentic connection happens between two whole people, not between one person and another's projection. The woman who walks away in silence isn't weak. She simply sees more. She sees beyond the surface, to the deeper truth, that she was always enough, always whole, always worthy of the love she's been giving so freely to others. And in this seeing, she becomes unforgettable. Not because she was hard to catch, but because she was impossible to diminish.